Doesn't matter. Go buy primers because that's going to be the most difficult thing to find if you ever had a without rule of law situation or some situation where you had to create your own ammunition. The most difficult thing to find is always going to be the primers.
Welcome to episode 6 of the Frugal Firearms Podcast, the podcast designed to help you, the shooter, get the most value for your money, get the most enjoyment, get the most pleasure, get the most product that you can possibly afford, and bring it to the range, bring it out on the hunt, show it to your friends. Really enjoy shooting sports to the maximum for the investment that you're making. My co-host is Ken. Say hello, Ken.
Hello, everyone listening in today.
And today's topic is what, Ken?
Reloading on a frugal basis, sort of a thing.
Yeah. Today, actually, Ken, being my co-host, actually is the guest as well, because he's the expert in reloading and I am not. So I'm going to play the part of the ignorant interviewer, and he's going to play the part of the subject matter expert. Everything we say here today, though, is we give our common disclaimer about, you're responsible for any actions or decisions you take based on the content of our show. We're only representing our own opinions and nothing more than that. None of this is legal advice, but specifically today, consider safety because reloading, can get you in a world of hurt if you do it wrong. So, always refer to the SAMI manuals, other reloading references, and plan accordingly. Plan to be safe, but also get the most out of your reloading experience. So, Ken, you know what? Something we've never done for the listeners before, we've never really talked about, who we are and how we got into shooting. So why don't you do a little bit of, kind of intro yourself, and maybe I'll intro myself a little bit, and then we'll get into that.
Sure. I was never really brought up with shooting, with the exception of I had my father, who passed away when I was only 3.5 years old. He was primarily a duck hunter back on the East Coast, and he had a lot of shotguns, a lot of side-by-side shotguns and so forth. My mom was 29 years old with 3 kids under the age of 6 when she was widowed, and she had his gun collection. What happened over time was, she was concerned with 2 boys under the age of 6, inquisitive boys. We knew what guns were. We'd seen them on TV. Very interested in them. Wanted to, play with them and stuff, and no, couldn't do any of that. My mom had them all locked away. But over time, and the fact that she needed money, she ended up selling pretty much all of my dad's firearms collection, which has kind of always saddened me over time. A lot of his side-by-sides went away, and there was only one firearm that was retained, which was the last firearm that was given to him by his father, my grandfather, which was a Sako or Seiko Vixen in 222 Remington. Very beautiful firearm. I'm fortunate to have it today. And it fires the 222, which if anybody knows is also known as the triple deuce. It was an incredibly accurate bench rifle, still is today. And it was the case and cartridge that was used for the 5.56 military. The 223 and the 5.56 military were based on the 222 Remington cartridge. It came out about 1950 or something like that, and that was used. So all of the M16s and all those 223s, 5.56 ammo, and all your AR platforms, those all come because of the 222 Remington. And actually, the first ARs that were ever built by Armalite were built in 222 Remington. And I actually, about 35 years ago, had a chance of actually buying one of those. And idiot, I didn't do it. I should have picked up one of those early AR semi-autos in 222 Remington. Would have been very interesting.
So let me ask you a question based on that, because, for our listeners, just background, Ken and I have a somewhat different perspective on collecting, if you will, guns. You have a lot more than I do. And it is part of that last statement is that, because of the regret, maybe sort of a FOMO thing, fear of missing out, that now you are inclined to buy things that probably I would not be inclined
Oh,
to buy?
absolutely. I mean, over time, I had the opportunity of talking to my uncles who knew my dad, and they would say, "Oh, your dad had a 16 gauge side by side. I think Stevens or Sterlingworth or something." And I was like, got to get a 16 gauge side by side. So I own a 16 gauge side by side, even though 16 gauge is kind of it's more unusual gauge by today's standards. It's not as popular, but it
But
was.
that's a really good one to. I mean, not that we want to segue right this moment into talking about reloading, which is the central topic today, but that's probably one you would need to reload to be able to make it affordable to use.
Yeah, to make it affordable. Yeah, I mean they do sell it. You can find it at the big box stores. 16 gauge. It's still there because they made a ton of 16 gauge shotguns back in the early part of the 20th century, and I think there are even still a few manufacturers that are chambering in that. They call it the Sweet 16. It's a gauge which is halfway between a 12 gauge and a 20 gauge. It had a lot more use back in the day because there actually were probably more differences, but in today's loadings of both 20 gauge and 12 gauge, they pretty much overlap, or they're very close to overlapping. So the 16 gauge kind of got squeezed out, but it's kind of a classic gauge. And whenever I do take it out and shoot with it, it is a nostalgic piece for me, and I really like that. So, and I've done that other things. He had a Supermatic semi-automatic 22 target pistol from High Standard, and that was sold off. And I acquired another one of those. And again, it's an original from about 1958 or 59. Beautiful pistol. I came with the original box of the one I got.
Ultimately, the one that you got that was, I think, to you the most important was representative of what your dad carried in the war, right?
Oh yeah, yes, yeah. My dad carried a BAR in Korea and got 2 bronze stars for valor with a BAR, Browning automatic rifle, model 1918. And of course, since that's generally speaking, a fully automatic firearm and can't be purchased here, they do make a variant called the Browning BAR 1918A3, which is a semi-automatic firearm. It's basically made with a new receiver, but basically made on all original parts, original barrel, original stock. A lot of the components, bipod and so forth, are all original pieces that came off of either mainly World War II and Korean War era type things. And it's a semi-automatic 30-06, fires from a closed bolt. So it has much of the same feel as if you were watching Band of Brothers. Same firepower, basically, but semi-automatic and closed bolt. It's actually super accurate, incredibly accurate. People are floored by the accuracy of that rifle. It weighs 18 pounds unloaded, and loaded it's like 22 pounds.
And that's part of the experience of having that gun, which is its insane weight. Absolutely.
Oh yeah. And you have to really put take your hat off to the people who carried that firearm in combat, both in World War II, actually started in World War One, and in World War II, and of course in Korea, and actually was used all the way up through Vietnam. And you occasionally even see one showing up on the news in the Philippines or something like that. It's fascinating.
Sure. Right.
Yeah.
I think by contrast, the difference with me, I mean, to tell you the truth, you were there as a friend right at the beginning of my gun experience. Ken and I, our first common interest was actually in cars. Mm-hmm. And that was preceded by years before guns. And I think at some point you said, you should get into guns or something. I don't remember exactly what the tipping point for me was. Perhaps you do. I don't happen to remember that. But all of my purchases have been sort of to fulfill a specific purpose or niche. So my collection is smaller because if I don't perceive that a gun doesn't do something different or better than another gun that I already have, then I don't buy it. So,
whereas my philosophy is different. I look at things and go, now that's a really weird and unusual design.
I need that, right?
I need that to add to my collection because, I mean, they didn't make very many of those. And that's a really strange looking thing, odd action to it or something about it's different, very different, that I'm intrigued by it. And I'll buy one, sometimes two.
And I did insert the word quote, I need that deliberately because I've heard you say that any number of times. It's like, Ken, why do you need that? Like,
And the question has always been,
need a roof over your head, you need food, you need water, things
the
like
question
that.
is this: is
Yeah.
how many firearms do you need? Oh, that's a very easy question to answer. It's one or two more than I currently have. That's the
Exactly.
answer to the answer to that question. And for anybody who's a collector, you ask a collector, how many of those things do you need? And it's always one or two more than I have. I have a friend who collects bass guitars, and he has electric bass guitars. And I go, how many? He's got like 15 of them. How many do you need? He goes, I need one or two more than I have. Okay, everyone's a little different.
There you go.
And
Right.
there you go. Yeah.
So that leads us into the discussion, the primary discussion today, which is reloading and how you can be frugal. And actually, you've touched on this before, Ken, getting better results via the reloading route. And so what I want to talk about as the person who doesn't reload, doesn't have reloading equipment. In all honesty, I'm not just playing the ignorant card here. I am ignorant. So I'm going to ask questions that might seem a little elemental, but I'm assuming that some of our listeners also don't have that background as well. So I'll start off just, since we were talking history. So based on your firearms journey, what led you to reloading? Was it boredom, or was it a need for a better round, or was it a need to save money, or something else?
It was probably a need to save money and a need to be somewhat self-reliant, not have to rely upon, because as I say, I got a bunch of unusual calibers, and it's very difficult to get factory loaded ammunition on some of these things. But I always tell people, save your brass, because your brass, most pieces of brass can be reloaded anywhere from 10 to 30 or 40 times. It depends on the pressure and stuff. So a lot of it was, I would get a certain amount of brass, and then from there it would be, okay, I can reload that thing, 10 times. So if you have 100 pieces of brass and you can reload it 10 times, you really have 1,000 pieces you could go out and shoot, really, by the time you needed more stuff. And I didn't want to rely upon the supply chain, because we've had runs on various ammunition things when we had different presidential elections and so forth. There's been runs on ammunition, and you couldn't get it, and the prices have gone up astronomically from when you and I started shooting.
Now, do you mean in reloading supplies, or in factory made ammunition? Or are you talking about both?
I'm talking about both, but like historically, we used to be able to get a single round of 22 long rifle for about a penny a round. Now they're about 10 cents a round. I mean, granted, we've been shooting for 30 plus years, but it's gone up dramatically. A primer, your typical rifle primer or pistol primer, they come in different sizes. There's small pistol, small rifle, and then there's large pistol, large rifle. There are bunches of variations on it, but I mean, they were typically around 2 cents, 3 cents a piece. Now they're typically around 12 cents a piece, 10, 12 cents a piece. Sometimes less, sometimes more, depends on what it is. But they've gone up significantly. A pound of gunpowder used to routinely be about $20 at the gun show, about $20, $21, $22. Now ranging anywhere from $35 to $50 a pound. Depends.
And you've looked recently. These are relatively recent prices.
Yeah, relatively recent prices.
Wow.
Yeah.
Now, is that because we're in California, or would you say that that's
partly that is because we're in California? But I mean, we're going to be somewhat skewed because we're out here on the left coast, and we experience the prices that are out here on the left coast, which are higher, I grant you, than most of the other parts of the country. But nonetheless, and there have been runs on primers, for example. Primers were very, very difficult to get a hold of, and that included by the ammunition manufacturers, because surprisingly, some ammunition manufacturers making factory ammunition don't make their own primers, and they rely upon actually a fairly small number: Remington, CCI,
right?
And then there's some overseas ones that come out there that from Europe and stuff. So primers were very difficult to get. And when I first started getting into reloading, somebody said to me, he says, if you go to a gun show and you walk around, you bring a couple $100 with you or whatever you're going to spend and buy some stuff. He says, at the end of the show, if you got 20 or 30, $40 left in your pocket that you hadn't spent because you didn't find what you're looking for, go over and buy some primers. And I'd be like, but I'm not really even that into reloading yet. He goes, doesn't matter. Go buy primers, because That's going to be the most difficult thing to find if you ever had a without rule of law situation or some situation where you had to create your own ammunition. And the most difficult thing to find is always going to be the primers. Powder, you can burn all sorts of things. Heck, you can make your own black powder in your house. I mean, there's lots of YouTube videos on how to create black powder, that type of thing. So finding something to burn is not that's the problem. Igniting it reliably with a primer is the
Mm.
single most difficult thing. So I started collecting primers, just as get a box here. And I used to buy them a box of 1,000, and get a box of 1,000 for like 25, $30. Now a box of 1,000 run you about $100, sort of a dime a piece.
So
But
what's the economics? So let's talk about, when you're going to build this bullet
mhm,
or round, I should say, from the bullet, the primer, the powder, and the case.
yep, 4 components that make up a cartridge. Yep.
As a function of a factory load, what do
Mhm.
you expect to spend as a percentage? Or do you
Okay.
or is that the wrong argument?
No. It varies. Now, say for example, you were talking about making your own or reloading your own 9 millimeter. Well, 9 millimeter is the single most popular centerfire handgun cartridge in the world. Okay, they make gazillions of them. Right, you can buy 1,000 rounds now for around $350 for 1,000 or 35 cents a piece. That's the typical factory price, even in California right now. And then that price had been higher and it's been coming down a little bit, which is good. But 35 cents. If you're going to be reloading 9 millimeter, the argument is I just want range ammo, plinking ammo, just to go and practice and stuff like that. It could be more of a hard sell to say, no, I'm going to reload my own. Just because of the amount of time you're going to be invested in and you've got to get the components and so forth. I mean, you might be able to make your own round for, let's say, assuming you already had the brass, you got to clean the brass, clean up, put new powder, new primer. So primer's going to run you, say, 8 cents. 8 cents for a primer. Powder, I don't know, that's probably 10 cents in there, saying up to 18 cents. And the bullet's going to cost you a dime. Depends on what, just a range bullet, not anything special, maybe 11, 12 cents. So you're already up to, pretty close to 30 cents. Okay. But you can buy a factory loaded piece of ammunition for like 35 cents. So if you're talking about 9 millimeter to reload, yes, I think you should be able to do it. Yes, I think you should have the components to do it at home. But can you make a case where you absolutely positively have to reload 9? No. Now you start talking the rifle cartridges or some of the more unusual cartridges. You got yourself a British 303 Enfield bolt action rifle from World War II, or you got yourself a 30-30 Winchester lever action. Okay, now you're talking that those rounds of ammunition are costing factory loaded ammunition or $1, sometimes $2 a round for some of those. Now you absolutely can make a much better financial decision reloading it yourself. Even some of like the 44 Magnums or the some of the more unusual handgun cartridges. The economics of it are definitely there. Plus, and what you alluded to, Craig, earlier was the ability to create your own custom load. Because every firearm, if you had 2 identical firearms, 2 identical rifles that came off the factory, and you both took them to the range, and you started playing with the loads, the same exact rifle, same caliber, same barrel twist rate, everything's identical, 2 identical rifles. You take them to the range and begin shooting them next to each other using loads that start differing by like a tenth of a grain or 1 grain of powder this way or that way. You'll find out that each rifle will have better accuracy on probably different loads. They'll be close, but they'll be different. So every firearm is slightly different. It's slightly different. The chambers are different. The barrels are different. It's different. And if you're going to go for absolute accuracy, you're going to become a bench rest shooter, or you're shooting for a hunting round where you're going to take a 700-yard shot at a bull moose, or something like this. You really want the distance. Then you're going to want to reload and you're going to want to do it yourself. And you're going to probably build specifically right onto that rifle, where that cartridge may function in other firearms of the same caliber, but it's going to function best in your particular rifle. And that's where hand loading really comes in.
All right. So let's talk about, you've got me interested, right? So,
Yeah.
but I'm going to rely on you. But not everyone has you as a resource. So for listeners who are interested in pursuing this because they see the benefit and they see the economics behind it, so kind of scale the investment here. If a person wants to, like, you can start off with this, a single station, and you can move up to progressives and things like that. I mean, how
Sure.
would you? I mean, assuming that again, this is the Frugal Firearms podcast, and we're assuming that most of our listeners are going to not write the check for the best thing that they can find from the most expensive
Right.
provider. How would you approach scaling up the investment and the
Okay.
process?
The entry level one, I would probably start out with, just to see if you like this. Buy 100 primers. Okay, that's going to run you about $10. Okay, you get 100 primers. You probably get them down at a sporting goods store or something like that. They sell them in packs of 100, 500, and 1,000. Okay, and 5,000 actually too. But you're probably just going to buy 100, and it's going to be a little tiny pack about 4 inches square, and it's going to be 100 primers. And make sure you get the proper ones. They'll be small pistol, Magnum pistol, large pistol, large rifle. Make sure you get the right one for the cartridge that you're going to try to reload. Great. Let's call it a dime a piece. You've hopefully been saving your brass, your range brass. You've been shooting at the range and picking that stuff up and saving it, which I would encourage everyone to save for several reasons. Obviously, most pieces of brass are worth anywhere from 8 cents to or more, up to $1 or more for some of the more unusual rounds. So it's always save your brass, and you can trade the brass even if you're not a reloader. You go to a gun show with a whole bag full of 30-06 brass that's been once fired. You can walk up to a table and go, "Hey, I need some loaded ammunition, or some factory ammunition. Can I trade you some of these?" And most of the time, the guys behind the table will say, "Absolutely," because they know that reloaders are going to be there doing it. So, okay, you buy yourself 100 primers. Okay, $10. I then go out and probably buy 1 pound of powder. Let's call it $30. And again, before you do any of this, you probably got to look up on a website or a book. You're going to come up with basically a recipe, and you're going to pick one of the recipes that have been tried and true. They're on the website. Hornady, Hodgdon has some websites that do it, and they basically have, I'm going to call them recipes for creating a loaded cartridge.
Are those reliable enough to, not just from a performance perspective, but do they need to look at the SAMI guidelines to say that the round is quote unquote safe based on the componentry, the
Oh yeah,
load, and so on? I mean, is
right,
that, yeah, I mean, I would say that would probably be at a minimum standard. You'd want to know that it has passed muster that way.
correct. I mean, you basically can, whatever you reload, you never start at the maximum. Um,
No, no,
you always
certainly not.
start at the minimum, way down at the minimum. And you work your way up by a tenth of a grain or a grain, depending on the thing. Let me tell you a little bit about grains. Powder, modern powder, actually even old powder, but powder is measured in grains. It's one of those throwbacks to the English system prior to the metric system. And we have pounds instead of kilos and all the rest of stuff. So you buy a pound of powder. So how many grains are in a pound? It's an interesting question.
Well, it's a
And
7,000th of a, is it 7,000th
yes,
of a, yes, right. Mm-hmm.
it's 1/7,000th of a pound. And you're like, what? What drunkard picked 1/7,000th of a pound to equal a grain? Okay, I don't know who did it, but it was done, centuries ago, and that's what we're stuck with. So,
I
so
think it had an agricultural reference, didn't it? To like
right.
grains
It
of rice. I mean, I really, like a carrot is actually based on a seed, so
Yeah,
it's along those lines. I could, anybody by now, probably half our listeners have already pulled up Wikipedia and already have the answer. So
right.
yeah,
They probably have the answers.
yeah.
Now, back in the day when we only had black powder, this is like prior to year 1900. Okay, when most firearms were still using black powder. Black powder was measured not by weight, was measured volumetrically. So they measured it by volume. So black powder was measured by volume. Okay. Modern powders, because the chemistry and the chemists have gotten really good at being able to get a lot of energy into a much lighter and smaller uh, amount of powder, That's not, modern powders are not measured volumetrically. They are measured by grains, by weight. So it's very important that when you start reloading, the single most important thing you have to do is to make sure that you have the proper weight of the powder, of whatever the charge is that you're putting into it. Um, and the differences can be stark. Like there's a particular powder that I like for reloading handgun ammunition for both 38 special, 357 Magnum, 9 millimeter, all of that stuff, which is called tight group. Okay. All right. Well, tight group, I reload like my 38 special in it. And a light load in 38 special is 2.7 grains, and a heavier load would be like 3.5 grains. So 1 pound of powder, okay, at 3.5 grains would allow me to reload 2,000 rounds of 38 special. 2,000 rounds out of one single pound of powder. So you're like, wow, that's an amazing thing. 9 millimeter, uses a little more powder because higher pressure and stuff like that. But since the chemistry is so good on the modern powders, it's absolutely critical that you don't overcharge or put too much powder in, because you can literally turn your handgun into a hand grenade. And
Yeah.
you can watch YouTube videos where people have put the wrong powder in. They thought they were putting in a certain brand and a certain type of powder in there, and they picked the wrong one. All the powders burn at different rates. They have different expansions. They expand at a different rate because they are technically a propellant, or I guess you call them a class 1 explosive or whatever. They're not a high explosive. They're a low explosive. I think that's the difference. But a powder is a propellant, really. And the propellants burn at different rates and expand at different rates. And it's absolutely critical. The single most important thing that you have to do in reloading is make sure that the weight is proper, which is why you usually want to get a really good scale. Now, they got scales that are little mechanical tipping scales. They do work. But I would tend not to use a mechanical scale, although they do function. You can get one of these digital scales. You can get them for $30 or something on Amazon. Zillions of brands. They have test weights that you set on there. You put it on a little scale that says, oh yeah, that's 10 grains or whatever it is. So you zero it out. You calibrate your scale every time before you use it. That type of thing. That all works great. So again, if you learn nothing else, the most important thing is that you have a good, I'm going to call it, recipe for your reload, which means that it's a certain caliber, it's a certain type of primer, it's a certain type of powder, because powders are all very different. It's not just the weight of the powder, it's that that this is a tight group powder, or there are probably 50 to 75 different powders that you can probably purchase. And whatever recipe that you've gotten from either a book or from a website, you have to stick with it and start very low on that scale, low amount of powder. And then if you need to work your way up, you can work your way up a little tiny bit at a time. But you'll learn that over time.
Yeah, so, well, or you'll learn it one way or the other. What would you say would be then, as far as the reloading equipment? So now we've talked about, maybe we're beyond the scope of this show would be bullet choice, because that has a lot to do with terminal ballistics and things like that.
Sure.
And the purpose of the round, and this could get three-dimensional very, very quickly.
Right.
But let's talk a little bit about the actual reloading presses. Going from single stage all the way up through progressives.
Initially, if a person were interested in getting into reloading, and they're going to try like a handgun or a rifle loading, and they want to go in totally cheaply, there's something called a Lee loader, L-E-E loader, and they've been making these for decades. And this is, for a lot of people, their first way into reloading. They actually don't require a press at all. You require a tap hammer, and that's about it. It's a little kit. They sell them on Amazon. They're roughly around $40 or so for whatever caliber you're looking for. And you can actually create reloadable, usable ammunition for about $40. And this is a kit that you can also, wrap up and toss into your backpack or something. If you were going out into the forest, you can actually reload in the field with this as well without having to have a lot. So the company Lee, L-E-E, I actually have a huge amount of respect for. They are both a budget entry level sort of a company, but they also have a ton of patents, and they've been in it for a longer than probably most other reloading companies. And they make very quality stuff, and I'm very happy about that. But I would consider going with a Lee loader at first, and would probably send people off to YouTube, and there are a bunch of YouTube videos on how to use a Lee loader. It's a nice thing to have, even if you don't like want to reload in the field or something like that. But it's a very tiny package. Thing comes in about a 6-inch by 5-inch by 1-inch thick little box. All you need is your primers, you need some powder, and you need your bullets that you're going to all be buying at the local sporting goods store, and a scale, of course, to most carefully measure the amount of powder and the exact type of powder you're going to be using, because you've already gotten an approved recipe that you've gotten off the internet or something. So a lead loader is not a bad way for a person to start.
But you also need dies, though, don't you? Because you have to get the seat depth. You don't.
The lead loader. The lead loader is the lead loaders are unique to each caliber.
Oh, okay. So it's essentially the die is already built into the product. Okay.
Yeah.
So as you get into now, if you get into other like a traditional bench mounted press, then you're talking about dies that can be, well, obviously can expand geometrically according to your interest in how you want, how many different calibers you want, and so on and so forth. Where would you say sort of the wise investment is?
The next step up, again, I would stick with Lee. Lee makes a bunch of very interesting tools, that reloading tools that I think if you're just getting into it and you want to see if you like it or not, or if you just think you want to be able to reload, but only in the case of an emergency type of deal where you want to know how to do it, but you don't necessarily want to do it every time. There are some people who poo-poo Lee, oh, you only have Lee, but that's not true. These guys are really good at what they do, and to be honest with you, if all you ever owned in your life was Lee equipment, you'd be doing just great. There's no problem with it at all. So anyway, we talked about the Lee loader as kind of being an entry-level one, or a field reloading. And if it's something that I would consider buying, they're about $40 for a Lee loader. Get them probably used on eBay and stuff. They're making them for decades and decades. It's a way to get into reloading. To try it out. You like it? You don't like it. I totally understand one way or the other. But it's also a nice thing to have in case you can't find ammunition and you have the ability to create your own. That's always a possible thing. The next step up is another Lee product. It seems like we almost probably get Lee on the. I
was going to say, I didn't know this was going to turn into an advertisement for Lee.
No, I mean, I'm just saying, I really like their stuff. The next step up is they have a hand press, which is kind of like this little, it looks like a kind of giant nutcracker type of a deal. And it lets you put in standard dies. And a Lee hand press is where you're actually going to step up to a set of dies. When you buy a set of reloading dies, you buy them for a caliber specific, and they are precision machined. Oftentimes they have high speed steel and carbide components to it, and it is the best way it's the way you can get the absolute closest to a factory load than anything else is with a set of actual dies. So, and a set of dies will run you anywhere from $50 to $75, depending on the caliber type of deal. And there are different types of dies, and we can go into that as well. There's full length dies. There's a neck only dies. There's a lot of variation there, and they're interesting, and we could talk about that for a while. But anyway, you're going to need a set of dies.
Well, how much does it take to offset the cost? I mean, if you're talking $75 just for a die for one caliber, then I guess, I'll let people do their own math about that's a consideration where the return on investment.
It's consideration, yeah. So not only do you need the primers, the powder, and the bullets. Okay, you're gonna need those anyway. You're now gonna need you're gonna set up to get a set of dies. Okay, let's call it $50 to $60. Okay, let's call it $60 for a set of really quality dies. Okay, great. And then you're gonna need some sort of a press, and that's gonna be like a hand press, which is going to be probably $75. Let's call it $75. And so you start adding up those costs, and yes, you're thinking, well, gee, that's a big investment. Yeah, you're over $100 now. You're probably getting closer to $200 for your investment. And what are you buying for that? Well, if you're just going to be doing range ammo, 9mm stuff, may not be an investment you want to make. However, If it's something that you're going to sit there and go, well, I got kind of a more unusual, I got a 30-30, I got a centerfire or 308 or a 30-06 or a 270 or some more unusual one. I think it becomes your investment at that point in time, your $200 investment becomes something where this is a good thing because you can then start reloading your own and then making the custom ammunition that allows you to tune it specifically to your rifle for either a light load if you don't want something to rip your shoulder off on some of these Magnum rounds, or you just want a plinking round, something you just want to punch holes in paper with, or whatever it might be. It's the ability to create the exact one the load that you want for your particular handgun or rifle, and also the fact that you now have the ability to create your own ammunition, provided, of course, you have some commercially available components like the primers and the powder and the bullets. And all of those things you can make yourself at home as well, but you're really getting kind of an esoteric. The vast majority of reloaders never do any of that.
Well, actually, but you know what? Someone does do that we've been in contact with, not to be named right now, but there's a potential guest coming up on the show who reached out to us, who is interested in. He does exactly that. He makes his own ammunition now, sells it commercially.
Yeah, it can absolutely be done. So when you're making ammunition, you mentioned it commercially. When you're making ammunition, you're really making it for yourself, for your own consumption at this point in time. Because if you mess it up, and you're selling it commercially, and you make it too hot a load or something like that, somebody else puts it in their gun and blows it up and hurts themselves. Well, you've got liability there. But reloading is really done primarily as an individual or maybe a family type of thing, somebody you trust. But it's not something that you should always be very concerned that if you're buying reloaded ammunition, that you buy it from a reputable source or from somebody who makes reputable ammunition. Because
go ahead. I'm sorry.
Yeah, no, because you can't be making a hand grenade. It's done wrong with the wrong powder, too much of it or whatever. You have a hand grenade in your hand, literally.
So tell me now, let's go to the other end of the scale. Someone, says, cool, I'm all in, but I don't want to do the progressive investments of start with a single stage and then go up to a 3-stage and then so on, so on, so on. What do you get if you go right for the top end? Because, maybe there's an efficiency argument there that I know I'm going to want to do this, but I'm not going to, like I mentioned before, use the reloading press as a substitute for going to the gym. And I'm not going to stand there and do multiple swipes per round. So tell us about the progressive reloaders.
Okay, at the high end of the scale that Craig's talking about is the progressive reloaders, and there are several manufacturers who make them, but many people consider Dillon to be the gold standard up there, and you're now in that $1,500 to $3,000 reloading press range for
really. I didn't know they were that much.
Oh, wow. Yeah. I mean, okay. They've got some that are a little bit less, maybe around $1,000. But when you start getting up there and you get automatic case feeders and automatic bullet feeders and priming stations and powder checkers that check and weigh the powder, and you're now at a commercial thing. It's one pull of the handle, you're getting one round out, and this is at the high end of the scale. So yeah, you can spend $3,000-4,000 to get yourself completely set up on what's called a progressive press. It's great tool. But you really have to then say, is that the type of shooter I am? Am I really putting 1,000 rounds down range every month that I need to come home and do it? Most people aren't. They're going to start frugally, shall we say, and they're going to start at that low end of the scale, and they'll advance. They'll move things up. Let me give you an example of this. One of the things that you want to do with your brass is you want to clean it. Okay, so one of the first ways, you can clean it by tossing it into your put it in a special bag and put it into your dishwasher, and it cleans it up reasonably well. But in reality, most people, the first thing they do is they get a vibratory cleaner. They get they call them at Harbor Freight. They vibrate, the little containers, they vibrate. And you put in, typically speaking, crushed walnut shells inside of it. And then you toss your brass into it. and the thing just vibrates away for an hour or two, and it just rubs all those little pieces of walnut shell all over your brass, and it polishes them up. And an hour or two later, you take that thing out, and it looks gorgeous. It looks beautiful. I mean, it's polished brass, just like somebody sat there and polished it amazing. So when you do that, that's like one of the first things for cleaning a brass. When you want to clean 100 cases, or maybe 200 cases of brass, so you've got to toss into your vibratory cleaner, turn it on, set the timer, go watch a movie on TV, come back in a couple hours and take them out, and then they got to separate the media, the cleaning media, out from the brass cases. It's not a bad way to go. A lot of people start there. I started there. I have a couple of vibratory cleaners. But after a while, what you find out is those little tiny pieces of walnut shell get themselves wedged in the primer hole.
Oops.
After you punch the primer hole out. So then I'm taking it up and looking down there with the light behind it, and punching out with a little pin, punching out the little pieces of walnut shell that get stuck in there. It's not necessarily bad. It's just okay. So what are your next steps up from there? Well, then they have liquid, where and this is where I go over to Franklin Armory. Franklin Armory makes another bunch of really good tools that I consider to be frugal, and it's another step up. They have these cleaners. They've got two different sizes, and it's basically a little tiny bathtub. It's about the size of a 5-pound coffee can back in the day, about a foot long and about 8 inches in diameter, and it's totally sealed. So you put it in there, you fill it up with water, put your cases in there, add some dish soap, and typically a little bit of lemon.
Or lemon juice, not lemon oil.
No, it's a lemon additive that they use for dishwashers to keep the spots away from your
a rinse aid.
Yeah, a rinse aid.
Yeah.
You add a little of that in there, and a couple of little capful of your favorite dishwashing stuff like that, and you put the whole thing in there along with this stainless steel media, these stainless steel pins that are about maybe a little more than a 1/4 inch long, and they're really little tiny things. You put about 2.5 pounds of these little tiny pins. They look exactly like pins that are about a 1/4 inch long. You drop them in there along with your brass, and then you just turn this thing on, and it just turns and rotates constantly. Now, the nice thing about it is it's quiet, whereas the vibratory cleaners, you got to have the thing in the garage someplace because the thing's buzzing away, making noise all the time. This thing, they're quieter. They make noise, but it's pretty quiet. And then you come back in about an hour, and all of a sudden the water that was in there is just filthy, and you got to pour it out, and maybe add some more water if it was really dirty, and do it again for another hour or so. And then ultimately you got to pour the whole thing out, and then you got to separate all the pins out, which you can do. They've got separators, for doing it. They're magnetic too. You can pull them off with magnets and stuff like that. You rinse out all the brass. Brass comes out looking gorgeous on the inside, on the outside, everywhere. And that's cleaning it with these water and pins. So if you start getting into reloading more, you do that.
And I guess since you're not reloading steel cases, and maybe you should just make a quick mention of why, but the brass and the magnetic steel, that's maybe the best way to separate those. Correct. I mean, maybe not. I don't know. I'm not really sure about that if I think about it, because if I have 10,000 little 1/4 inch pins stuck to my magnet, I mean, how the hell do I get them off my magnet? Unless it's an electromagnet that I can turn off and have them all dropped or something. I mean, that sounds painful.
Well, generally speaking, nobody reloads steel case ammunition. Steel case ammunition, although it's popular, I mean, Tula makes it. It's a lot of the stuff comes in from Russia and the Eastern Bloc. Probably maybe not now during the Ukraine war, but it used to come in there. There's a lot of it out there. Steel cased ammunition is, generally speaking, fire once and walk away, and that's it. Just recycle it as steel, but it's not anything you're going to try to reload. Also, I can talk about another thing about primer types. Oddly enough,
I knew that was coming. Right.
Yeah, primer types. There are really two types of primers in the reloading world. There's something called boxer primed, and there's something called Berdan primed. Interestingly enough, if you go back and do the history on it, Berdan primers were invented here in the United States during the Civil War, I believe, by a gentleman, one of the Union, I think it was a Union officer, Berdan. and they are wildly popular in Europe. The other priming method that is used is boxer primed. And boxer primed, I believe, if you look it up, were invented in, I think, the UK, England. And they are wildly popular in the United States. So it's kind of interesting that the two different methods of priming cartridges, one invented in the United States, popular in Europe, the other invented in Europe, popular in the United States. The advantage of boxer primed, if you ever get a piece of brass and you that's been fired and the bullet's already gone, the powder's gone, you take a little flashlight and you look down inside the brass, inside the case. You look down all the way to the bottom of the case and you see a single hole down at the bottom. That is boxer primed. And that's, typically speaking, probably 98% of all the reloading that you'll probably ever hear about being done in the United States, maybe 99%, is going to be reloading boxer primed. The reason is it's very easy to take a single punch, go right down through the center of the cartridge, and then just push through the little primer hole, and it pops out the primer. Very easy to do.
Yeah. Whereas there's two holes that are not on center.
Right.
In the other. Right.
In Berdan primed brass, which you will see, and you'll see it, particularly if you collect brass at the range and it's on the ground, you pick it up, you flash your little flashlight down there, and you look down into the bottom of the case. Sometimes you see two holes, sometimes you see three holes that are down off center. They're smaller holes. These are flash holes. This is where the primer would flash a little jet of flame out to ignite the powder inside the case. Whereas in a boxer prime, you have a single hole. In a Berdan prime, you have two or three holes, and they're off-centered. And it's very difficult to reload Berdan primed brass. It can be done. There are special tools for it. Almost nobody does it. I only know one person who does it. And that's only because he has some very, very unusual pieces of brass that have not been manufactured in like almost 100 years. I mean, it's very unusual stuff. And you can reload it. They do sell Berdan primers, but they're rare, very rare. You won't hardly ever see them. And frankly, they're almost not worth talking about in the United States because I would not recommend reloading Berdan at all.
Sure.
And a lot of the Eastern Bloc stuff, the Eastern Bloc ammunition, or the surplus ammunition you might come over, even if it's in an American caliber like a 30-06, you look down, Craig, some of the 30-aught that I think you've given me, I've looked down there, and it is Berdan prime. And
really?
Although it's a nice piece of brass, 30-06 brass, probably not ever going to reload that piece.
Yeah. So reminder to the listeners too, even if you're not a reloader, picking up your brass at the range, it's not only a good thing just to keep the range clean, but make a new friend who's a reloader and give them that brass, and maybe they'll reciprocate and give you some made up rounds, or I don't know, buy you a 6-pack or whatever the case might be. So I guess, finishing out here, what would you say if you wanted to, your average guy is probably not going to go for the 6-station, automated reloader. He's probably not going to go for the Lee, handheld, one bullet at a time thing. Can you recommend, maybe not by brand, but like, where's the kind of the compromise in the middle, would you say? That most people, like the best value proposition for most people to go to?
Right. I would think that you're going to need to get a budget, probably to kind of get yourself into it, somewhere between $200 and $300 worth of equipment. I do like the Lee equipment, and I like Franklin Armory equipment.
About Redding and others, there's other brands.
Redding's beautiful stuff. Redding, Dillon, RCBS. These are all great stuff. I mean, fantastic quality stuff. A little bit higher end. And again, look for a lot of these things on your eBay or in your local Craigslist. Search for reloading and reloader, those two keywords, and occasionally you'll come across some fantastic deals on presses and on various things. So educate yourself. Take what I've said. Send us in some questions on it. I'd love to answer them.
That's right.
Tell you what my thoughts are on various things. But there's a lot to learn, and there are a lot of different ways to do it. But again, the one single thing that I would say is know what your powder is and be very careful about the weight of that powder. That is the single most important thing, because that's the difference between having a loaded cartridge and having a hand grenade.
Right. And I think that maybe if we get one of the companies on like Hornaday you were mentioning or Barnes or one of the other companies to talk about the bullets themselves, then we can start talking about things like terminal ballistics
Oh yeah.
and perhaps the experience they've had. I've reached out to a few different companies, so we're looking forward to having those as guests in the future. And as a reminder to our guests, our next couple shows should have a couple different companies, keeping variety of topics here. Those will be coming up in the next few weeks. And anyone who wants to reach out to us, as Ken mentioned, can do so at frugalfirearmspodcast@gmail.com or drop us a note on one of the social media, either Instagram or we're up on Twitter now as well, or Facebook. Obviously, hitting the like, subscribe, and leaving comments is definitely welcome because it helps more people see the show. And by the way, thanks to the new international listeners we've got people in, let's see, Belgium and Poland and Germany and Hong Kong and a few others, Canada, that have joined the show. So that's very much appreciated as well. So what are the closing comments do you have for us, Ken? That was very informative, and I think it's going to be useful for a lot of people.
Yeah, I look forward to it. I mean, there are a lot of nuances there that we could go into further. Just let us know what you like to hear, and we will try to tailor something to talk to you all about. And if it's about reloading or something collecting, I'm your guy. Thank you so much.
Thanks very much for listening, and we hope to hear from you soon, but you will definitely be hearing from us soon. Good night.